Some watch from the dark because the light was never theirs to enter. But every locked door remembers the shape of the hand that could open it. The lamp is still burning. Our story starts in this very moment. The parchment came to him face down, which was how the ministry preferred to hand Draco Malfoy anything, as if his name, printed plainly, might smudge whoever passed it. He turned it over in the grey light of the Aura Annex, that cramped afterthought of a room they'd given the probationary staff, the ones tolerated rather than trusted. The order was 3 lines. A name he knew, an address he did not. And beneath, in the cramped hand of a duty clerk who hadn't bothered with courtesy, nightly perimeter wards until threat neutralized. Subject not to be disturbed. The name at the top was the part that stopped the breath in his chest, though his face gave nothing away. He had practiced for years, giving nothing away. Granger, H. He set the parchment down on the scarred desk very carefully, the way a man sets down something that might go off. The tooth of the old wood caught the edge of the page. Somewhere down the corridor, a kettle shrieked and was silenced. He read the 3 lines again, and the room seemed to contract around them. They wanted him to guard her house. Her sleeping house. They wanted the least wanted man in the building to stand in the dark outside Hermione Granger's home, night after night, and keep the wards breathing so that nothing could reach her. And they had chosen him, not because they trusted him with her life, but because no one else would take the shift, and because a Malfoy could be sent into the cold without anyone feeling they owed him warmth. Subject not to be disturbed. She wouldn't even know. That was the shape of it. He'd be a shimmer at her fence line, a smell of ozone after the ward casting, a thing that came when the lamps went out and was gone before the milk. She would sleep, and he would keep the dark from her, and she would never learn whose hands had done it. He should have felt nothing. He had trained himself through the long grey seasons since the war to feel as little as the job allowed. Instead, something turned over low in him, slow and uneasy, and he could not have named it if his freedom had depended on the naming. The threat was real. That much the file made clear. Antonin Broadmoor, not the famous kind of dark wizard, not one whose face went on the front of the prophet, but the patient, clerical kind, the kind who kept ledgers of grievance. 6 years ago, when Hermione Granger still wore the Aura's coat before she moved to the quieter cruelty of law enforcement policy, she had built the case that sent him through the black gates of Azkaban. The file said he had been meticulous even in the dock. It said he had looked at her across the courtroom and smiled as though noting an appointment for later. Now the gates had failed. A lapse the ministry was working very hard not to call a lapse, and Broadmoor was somewhere out in the wet English dark, and small scorched marks had begun appearing on the outer stones of a house in a quiet terrace. Burns in the precise shape of a woman's initials. Draco read all of this by candle in the annex after the others had gone home, and when he blew the flame out, the smell of it stayed on his fingers like a warning. Her house surprised him. He had expected something austere, something with the clean rigour of her mind. Instead, it was narrow and warm-looking, even from the outside, the last in a row of terraces on a street where muggles walk their dogs, and never once glanced at the man standing motionless beneath the plane tree. Ivy had been allowed to grow up one side, untamed, a small rebellion. A single lamp burned amber behind an upstairs curtain. He stood at the low iron gate and did not open it. Rain had begun, that fine, needling London rain that isn't weather so much as a mood the sky is having. It gathered on the shoulders of his coat, on his lashes, ran cold beneath his collar to the notch of his spine. He didn't cast a repelling charm. He let it come. There was something almost bearable about being cold on the outside when the discomfort matched what sat beneath his ribs. He drew his wand. The wards rose from his hand the way they were meant to. Low, patient enchantments that laced through the mortar and the ivy and the very rain. A lattice of protection woven so fine that anyone crossing it with harm in their heart would ring it like a struck glass. He worked slowly. He was good at this. It was the one thing the ministry had found he was good at, this quiet architecture of safekeeping, and there was a bitter joke in it he had stopped bothering to laugh at. The boy who had let killers through a wall now spent his nights sealing walls against them. The magic settled. The street went quiet under it, and Draco Malfoy, having done exactly what he had been ordered to do, discovered that he could not make himself leave. That was the first crack. He would locate it later, tracing back, this exact moment, boots rooted in wet grass, the amber lamp above him going dark as she finally slept, and himself standing there past all reason, keeping a watch. No one had asked him to keep past the casting. Go home, he told himself. The wards hold. You are not required. He stayed. He told himself it was diligence. A Malfoy discharging a duty with excessive care, so that no clerk could ever write insufficient beside his name. He told himself the rain was too heavy for apparition, that he'd wait for it to ease. He told himself a great many reasonable things, and each of them was a small polished stone laid over the truth, which was this. For the first time in years, standing in the dark beneath her window, with the cold going through him, he did not feel like a thing that had ruined the world. He felt, absurdly, like a thing that could keep one small part of it safe. He hated how much he wanted to feel that. He came back the next night, and the one after. The pattern set itself with the quiet inevitability of habit becoming need. He would arrive after her lamp went dark, or sometimes, he was not proud of this, a little before, when the window still held its warm rectangle of light, and, occasionally, the moving shadow of her passing behind the curtain. He never opened the gate. He never crossed onto her ground beyond what the ward work required. There was a line, and he kept to it with the fervour of a man who knows he has only a few clean lines left in his life and cannot afford to lose one. But he watched the lit window until it wasn't lit. He couldn't seem to stop. He learned the rhythm of her insomnia. She kept late hours. He could have told the clerk that, had the clerk asked, which the clerk never did. Some nights the light burned until 2, 3, and he imagined her at a desk behind it, that furious focus he remembered from a lifetime ago, ink on the side of her hand. Some nights it went dark early, and he stood a moment longer than the casting needed, listening to the rain find the gutter, telling himself he was confirming the wards had taken. Some nights he heard her cough, or a book fall, or once, only once, a low sound that might have been the end of crying, and his hand had gone flat against the cold iron of the gate before he caught himself, before he remembered that he had no right, none, to any of her sorrows. He did not go in. He wanted to be clear with himself about that, always. He never once considered going in. The house was hers. The dark inside it was hers. He was a sentinel at the edge of it, and nothing more. And the edge was the whole of what he was permitted. And he clung to that edge like a man on a ledge clings to stone. But he began to wait for the nights. That was the thing he couldn't govern. The daylight hours in the annex, the sneers and the face-down parchments, the long grey business of being merely tolerated, all of it became a thing to be got through. A corridor leading to the one place where he was, for a few cold hours, of use to the only person alive whose good opinion he had long ago decided he would never have and had never stopped, secretly, wanting. It frightened him, how quickly it became the shape of his life. He recognized it for what it was. He had watched addiction take people. He had been the thing certain people were addicted to fearing. He knew the mechanism. And he stood in her garden in the rain and let it take him anyway, because the alternative was to go back to feeling like nothing, and he was so tired of feeling like nothing. On the 9th night, the rain came down in earnest, no longer a mood, but a verdict, hammering the plane tree, sheeting off the slate roofs, drumming the pavement to a black mirror. He raised the wards through it, and the ozone smell of his own magic mingled with the wet iron scent of the storm, and the lattice settled over the house and held. Her window was dark. It had been dark for an hour. He should have gone. The storm was violent enough now to make even lingering absurd. Water ran off the end of his nose. His coat was a sodden weight. His fingers had gone past cold into a numb, distant ache. And then, behind the dark glass of the downstairs window, the one nearest the door, the one he had never once seen open at this hour, a light bloomed, small, wavering, a wand light, cupped low, moving. Every part of him went still and sharp at once, the sentinel waking beneath the exhausted man. The wards hadn't rung. Nothing had breached them. He'd have felt it in his teeth. So it was her, awake, moving through her own dark house at 2:30 in the morning with her wand lit low. And there was no reason in the world for his heart to be going the way it was going. The light drifted toward the front of the house, toward the door. And Draco understood, with a cold that had nothing to do with the rain, that she was coming to the door because she had seen him, that somehow, across 9 nights of rain and silence, Hermione Granger had felt the shape of a watcher at the edge of her ground, and was walking toward it now with her wand already in her hand. The bolt drew back with a sound like a small bone breaking. The door opened onto rain and darkness, and in the doorway stood Hermione Granger with her wand held low and level, its light throwing hard shadows up the underside of her face. She did not look afraid. That was the first thing that struck him, standing frozen beyond the gate with the storm hammering his shoulders. She looked awake in the particular way of someone who has trained herself never to be caught sleeping. A stillness in her that was all readiness, weight balanced, wand arm steady as a shelf. 6 years of the aura's coat did not leave a body. It lived in the tendons. "I know you're there," she said. Her voice carried under the rain without being raised. It had the flat, deliberate calm of a woman managing something dangerous, and it went through him more coldly than the storm had. He did not answer. There was no answer that would not make it worse. "The wards have been holding for 9 nights," she went on, and now she stepped out beneath the small stone lintel, out of the doorway shelter, and the rain took her at once, plastering a curl to her cheek, and still she did not lower the wand. Perimeter enchantments, layered, good ones actually, better than the office usually bothers with. And every night, for a fraction of a second before they settle, there's a second signature at the fence line, a caster's residue. Her chin lifted a fraction. "You've been standing in my garden, watching my house go dark, for 9 nights. The plane tree groaned overhead. Water sluiced from the gutter in a rope. "Come where I can see you," Hermione said, "or I hex the tree line and we find out together who you are." Draco stepped forward. He didn't decide to. His body did it, the way a man arraigned finally stands when the verdict is read, because there is nothing left to be gained by sitting. He moved out from beneath the plane tree into the wash of her wand light and let it fall full on his face and watched the recognition arrive. It came in stages. First, the widening of her eyes, that involuntary flare, then a stillness deeper than the readiness had been, a whole body arrest as her mind refused and then accepted and then raced. And then, last, something he had not been braced for and had no defense against. Not fear, not even the old contempt, but a swift, complicated hurt that crossed her face like weather and was gone before she could stop it, leaving her jaw set hard against its return. Malfoy. His name in her mouth. He had wondered, on the long nights, how it would sound if she ever said it again. Not like this. Never like this. "They sent me." His voice came out low and ruined by disuse. He hadn't spoken aloud in hours. "The office, toward the house. Broadmoor's out. You know Broadmoor's out." "I know exactly who's out." The wand didn't waver. "What I don't know is why the wardcaster is you, and why no one told me, and why in 9 nights you never once knocked on my door to say good evening, Granger. I'll be the man in your garden tonight." Each phrase landed clean and hard, like coins on a counter. "They sent you to protect me, and didn't think I'd want to know. And you—" The smallest crack, there, quickly sealed. "You let them not tell me. You stood out here in the dark, and you watched me sleep, and you let me believe I was alone. You weren't supposed to notice." It was the wrong thing. He knew it was the wrong thing, even as the words left him and could not call them back. Her breath left her in something that was almost a laugh and had no laughter in it. "I wasn't supposed to notice." She said it slowly, tasting the shape of the insult. "There it is. Of course. The great convenience of me. Do the job. Keep the woman ignorant. Let her sleep her useful little sleep while the men decide what she's allowed to know about her own life." The wand light trembled, not from fear, he understood, but from the pressure of everything she was holding back. "Do you have any idea, what it does to a person to learn they've been watched? That your privacy, the one place that's yours, the dark of your own house at night, someone's been standing in it, even to keep me alive, even for that." And there it was. The wound was not the danger. The wound was the watching. She had said it more truly than he could have, and it struck him under the ribs, because he had known, standing out here night after night, that this was the trespass, not his boots on the grass, but his eyes on her window, And he had let himself do it anyway, and told himself the line he kept was the line that mattered, when all along the line he was breaking was the one that mattered most. The rain ran down his face. He did not wipe it away. He did not raise his own wand, though it was in his sleeve, though a decade of instinct screamed to bring it to his hand. He stood in the light she held on him and let her see the whole of him getting soaked, unshielded, unarmed. And he did the only thing he had left that might be worth anything. "You're right," he said. Whatever she had braced for, it wasn't that. He saw it land, a flicker, a hitch. But she was Hermione Granger, and she did not release ground she had won. "Don't." Her voice roughened. "Don't you agree with me? Like that costs you anything. Like being reasonable now unmakes the 9 nights." "It doesn't." He kept his hands open at his sides, palms out, the rain pooling in them. "It unmakes nothing. I'm not asking it to." He drew a breath that scraped. "I should have knocked. The first night. I should have stood on your step like a person and told you the office had sent a Malfoy and given you the chance to send me away and demand someone else. You'd have been within every right. Instead, I let them keep it from you because—" He stopped. "Because it was the one place I was of use to you. Because out here in the dark, I got to keep you safe, and you never had to know it was me. And a man never has to see the disgust on a face that doesn't know he's there." He could not say it. Not because it was too much to admit, but because saying it aloud, to her on this step, would be to lay the true weight of it at her feet and make her carry it. Make her responsible for the thing his watching had meant to him. And that would be one more trespass, the worst yet. So he did with it what he did with all of it. He let the silence hold it. "Because," he said instead flatly, "I was a coward, as usual." The words sat between them in the rain. Hermione stared at him. The wand light caught the wet on her face, and he could not tell any longer what was rain and what might not be, and it was not his to ask. Her arm, at last, came down. Not in surrender, not in trust, but in something more exhausting than either. The simple physical impossibility of holding a wand level on a man who was not going to fight. In a storm, at 2:30 in the morning, when she was tired to the bone, and the thing she'd been braced against for 9 nights turned out to be this. "Get inside," she said. He didn't move, certain he'd misheard, certain the rain had bent the words. "I'm not going to stand in a monsoon debating the ethics of surveillance with Draco Malfoy," she said. And now the old asperity was back, a plank thrown across the chasm just to have something solid underfoot. "You're soaked through, and if you die of exposure on my step, the paperwork will be appalling. And I have questions, and you're going to answer them somewhere I can hear you over the weather. Inside. Now. And Malfoy?" She turned in the doorway, wand light swinging, and pinned him with a look that had convicted men. "You cross exactly as far as the kitchen, not one board further. This is not an invitation into my house. This is me refusing to conduct an interrogation in the rain. Are we clear?" "Clear," he said. He crossed the gate. He crossed the small drowned garden where he had stood for 9 nights and never once set foot beyond the fence line, and the crossing of it felt enormous, felt like stepping off the edge of the map. He stopped in the doorway. Water ran off him onto her threshold in a widening dark stain. "Wand on the table where I can see it," Hermione said, already moving into the warmth of the house, lighting lamps with sharp flicks as she went, so that the kitchen bloomed gold ahead of them. Both of us. Fair's fair. I'm not hexing an unarmed man, and I'm not sitting across from an armed one. We disarm together, or we don't talk. He came into the kitchen. It smelled of wood smoke and old books, and something herbal gone cold in a cup by the sink. The whole warm human clutter of a life lived alone and lived fully, and the wrongness of being inside it, of his sodden, ruined presence standing in the middle of it, closed his throat. He drew his wand slowly, holding it flat across 2 fingers so she could see it wasn't gripped, and set it on the scrubbed pine of the table with a small wooden click. She set hers down opposite, a foot of bare tabletop between the 2 wands, gleaming with the wet of him, the wood catching lamplight along its grain. They stood on either side of it, the length of the table between them, both dripping, both breathing slightly too hard, and for one suspended moment, neither reached for a chair, neither spoke, and the only sound was the rain flinging itself against the black glass, and the small arrhythmic tick of water falling from the hem of his coat to her flagstone floor. Hermione looked at him across the table for a long time. The fury had burned down to something quieter and far more difficult to stand under. A searching, weighing, seeing attention, the look of a woman recalibrating everything she thought she'd known. 9 nights, she said at last, softly, almost to herself. You stood out there in the cold for 9 nights. Nobody made you stay past the casting. The wards hold on their own once they're set. I know how ward work functions, Malfoy. I know you could have cast and gone. Her head tilted. The lamplight moved on her throat. But you stayed. Every night. Why? And Draco Malfoy, who had 100 lies ready and had lived his whole life behind them, opened his mouth to reach for one, and found, standing in her kitchen with his wand on her table, and the rain at the glass, and her eyes on him at last, truly on him, at last seeing that he was there, that not a single one of them would come. Because it was the only useful thing I've done in 6 years, Draco said. The truth left him the way blood leaves a wound, without permission and with a strange lightness after. He watched it reach her across the foot of gleaming pine. He had not meant to say it. He had meant to say nothing, or to say something armoured and dry, and instead, the thing beneath all the armour had simply walked out into the open and stood there, dripping, as ruined as the rest of him. Hermione went very still. Sit down, she said after a moment. It was not gentleness, but it was not what had come before either. He sat. The chair took his sodden weight with a creak. Across from him, she lowered herself into her own, slowly, never fully taking her eyes from him, and reached without looking to the pot on the range and touched her wand hand to its side to warm it. An old, unthinking domesticity, the gesture of a woman who has made tea in a crisis before and knows the ritual buys time to think. Steam began to lift between them. The kitchen smelled suddenly of bergamot and rain. I'm going to say some things, Hermione said, and you're going to let me say them, and then you're going to answer me plainly, because I have had a very long 9 nights myself, and I am fresh out of patience for the ornamental. She set 2 cups down, filled them, slid one across the wood until it stopped an inch from his hand, and he understood the precise distance of it. near enough to be offered, far enough that she need not brush his fingers. You've been sent to guard the life of a woman you spent your childhood despising. You could have done the bare minimum and been thanked for even that, because no one expects better of you. And I mean that as a fact about the Malfoy, not a courtesy to you. Instead, you did more than was asked, in secret, in the rain, for no credit. And when I caught you, you didn't fight, and you didn't lie. She wrapped both hands around her cup as though for warmth, though the kitchen was warm now. That doesn't fit. You understand that it doesn't fit. For years, I have kept a very tidy shelf in my head with you on it, and tonight you've knocked yourself off it, and I find I resent that quite a lot, because now I have to actually look at you, and I did not plan to spend tonight looking at you. Something in his chest turned over, painful and unfamiliar. He looked at the cup she'd given him rather than at her. "I'm not asking you to look at me," he said. "I know you're not." She was quiet a beat. That might be the part that's undoing me. The rain went on against the window, softer now, the storm's temper spent, settling into the long, patient weeping that would last till dawn. A lamp guttered and steadied. Somewhere in the walls of the old house, the timbers ticked as the heat found them. "Broadmoor," she said, changing the ground beneath them deliberately, retreating to the one subject that was safe because it was terrible. "Tell me what the office actually knows, not the file. The file is written for people who won't read past the first page. Tell me what you've heard in that annex where they think the probationers can't hear." So he told her, and in the telling, something eased. Not the tension between them, which did not ease so much as change its nature, but the impossible strangeness of the situation, which the shared fact of a hunted man made briefly bearable. He told her that Broadmoor's escape had not been chaos but craft, that the marks on her outer stones were not threats in the ordinary sense, but a kind of accounting, a man ticking through a ledger, that the office was frightened in the particular cowardly way of institutions, more afraid of the paperwork of her death than of her death, and that this was why they had reached for the cheapest, most disposable wardcaster they had, and found him. "They reached for you because you don't matter to them," Hermione said when he'd finished. It was not cruel. It was worse than cruel. It was accurate, and she said it while looking at him as though the accuracy pained her. "And you took it because it let you be near something that did matter, to you." He said nothing. His hands were around the cup now, though he did not remember picking it up. The heat of it hurt his cold fingers, and he held on. "That's the answer to my question, isn't it?" she said softly. "Why did you stay? You stayed because out there, for 9 nights, you got to be someone who kept me safe, and no one had to know it was you. So no one had to be disgusted, and you didn't have to watch a face fall when it recognized you." She read it off him plainly, mercilessly, exactly as he had refused to say it on the step. And there was no triumph in her reading of it, only a kind of grave attention, as though she were handling something that could cut her. "You let yourself want the one clean thing without ever having to risk being seen wanting it." His knuckles whitened on the porcelain. The rim of the cup pressed a hard line into his palm. "Don't do that," he said, low. "Do what?" "Understand me." The words came out through his teeth. "You're not supposed to be able to do that. It was easier when you—" He stopped, set the cup down before it cracked in his grip. "It was easier when you looked at me the way you looked at me on the step. Do that again. I'd prefer that." Hermione's mouth opened, closed. For the first time all night, she looked genuinely thrown, the readiness gone out of her posture, replaced by something that had to reach for its footing. Her hand left the cup and went, of its own accord, to the loose fold of her sleeve. She'd thrown a cardigan over her nightclothes before coming down, and now her fingers found the cuff of it and worried the edge straight, tugging it flat against her wrist. Once, twice. A small, frantic tidiness with no object, smoothing fabric that lay perfectly well already. She caught herself doing it, made herself stop, laid her hand flat on the table. "I can't," she said, and it came out rawer than either of them expected. "Look at you the way I did on the step. I can't get back there now. You've—" A breath. "You've gone and been human at me, in my kitchen at 3 a.m, and I can't unsee it, and I am furious with you for it. Do you understand? Because it was a great deal simpler when you were only ever the worst thing that happened to me at school. I had you filed, and you—" Her voice thinned. "You stood in the rain for 9 nights to keep me alive and asked for nothing. And now I have to hold both of those men in my head at once, the boy and this. And I don't know where to put you, Malfoy. I genuinely don't." The rain fell. The lamps burned low and gold. The foot of pine between them, which had held 2 wands and now held 2 cooling cups, seemed at once impossibly wide and no distance at all. "Put me outside," Draco said. His voice had gone very quiet. "That's where I go. That's where I've been. Set the wards to your own hand from now on, if you like. You're more than capable. You never needed me. The office just needed a name to blame if it went wrong. I'll tell them you dismissed the detail. You'll never have to see me in your garden again." He rose, and the chair scraped back, and he did not reach for his wand. "You don't have to hold 2 of me in your head. There was only ever the one. I just, for 9 nights, got to pretend otherwise." He turned for the door. "Malfoy." He stopped. He did not turn back. He could not have said why. Only that turning back felt like more than he was allowed, that he had already taken more of her warmth and her attention and her impossible, unbearable understanding than a man like him had any right to, and that if he looked at her again across the gold-lit room, he might do something unforgivable, like ask to stay. "Take your wand," she said. "You left it on the table." He came back for it. She had not moved. The wand lay where he'd set it, in the foot of space between her hand and his, and to retrieve it, he had to reach across that space, into her half of the table, close enough that he could see the exhaustion under her eyes, and the pulse going at her throat, and the way she was holding herself still with visible effort. His fingers closed on the wandwood, and for one suspended second, the storm hushing at the glass, the lamps holding their breath, the whole ruined, improbable night narrowing to a single point. Neither of them drew back. His hand around his wand, 6 inches from her hand, flat on the pine, and the air between the two of them thickening to something almost solid, a static in it that lifted the fine hairs on his forearm, a pull he had no name for and no right to, and no power at all against. Then Hermione drew her hand back into her lap, and the spell of it broke, and he straightened with his wand, and the cold rushing back into the space where the nearness had been. "Ward from outside," she said. Her voice was steady again, but only just, held level the way a full cup is carried. "You're right that I don't strictly need you, but Broadmoor is patient, and I am tired, and 2 wands are better than 1, even if one of them is yours. So, you may continue the detail. But Malfoy, you knock. Every night. You stand on my step, and you tell me you're there, and I decide each night whether you cross the gate. The dark of this house is mine. You do not get to be in it without my knowing. Not ever again." "Yes," he said. The single word cost him everything, and he paid it gladly. "Then go home," Hermione said, "before I remember I'm angry with you." And she did not look up as he crossed to the door, and she did not watch him go. But long after the latch had clicked and the garden gate had swung shut on its wet hinge, she sat alone at her table between the 2 cold cups, one hand pressed flat over the place on the pine where his had been, feeling the ghost of a warmth that was not there and could not, for the life of her, make herself get up and go back to bed. He knocked the next night and every night after. It became its own small liturgy. The walk from the gate through the wet garden, the 3 raps of his knuckles on her door, the wait. Some nights she opened it herself, cardigan drawn over her nightclothes, and looked at him a moment before saying, "All right," and standing aside to let him ward from the threshold. Some nights she called "I'm here," Malfoy through the wood without opening, and he cast from the step and heard the wards take and went away with only her voice to carry home. Once she did not answer at all, and he stood in the dark with his heart going wrong, until he heard, faint through the glass, the scratch of a quill, and understood she was only working, lost in it, and he cast his enchantments soft as breath, so as not to break her concentration, and left without knocking again. The terms held. He did not cross the gate uninvited. He did not watch the window. When the wards were set, he turned his back on the lit house and gave her the privacy of not being seen. And this, the deliberate turning away, the discipline of not looking, became a strange devotion in itself, harder than the watching had ever been, and worth infinitely more. But the knock changed things, as she must have known it would. It made him a person on her step instead of a shimmer at her fence. It required, each night, a small exchange, and small exchanges, repeated, become a language. "You're limping," she said one night, holding the door 3 weeks in. The rains had eased into the raw clear cold of true autumn, and frost had begun to fur the iron of the gate. "It's nothing. It's a limp. Limps are not nothing." She frowned at him through the gap. "Broadmoor. A training accident. The office runs the probationers through combat drills on Tuesdays, on the theory that we're expendable enough to practice on." He said it without self-pity, a plain report, and saw her register the flatness of it and dislike it. "A hex got past my shield. It's healing. Healing crooked by the look of you." A pause, during which some internal argument played out behind her eyes, brief and fierce. Then, with the air of a woman doing something against her own better counsel, "The ward line runs along the inside of the garden wall. You could cast it from the bench under the plane tree just as well as from the gate, and you could sit down while you do it and stop standing on my step like a delivery you're not sure I'll accept." She stepped back further, opening the door wider onto the warm hall. "The bench, not the house, but you may sit in my garden, Malfoy, instead of haunting the edge of it." It was not much. It was everything. He sat on the cold stone bench beneath the bare plane tree and cast the wards. And she did not close the door all the way, but left it ajar, a hand's width of gold light falling out across the frost. And though she did not come out, and he did not go in, they existed for a quarter of an hour in the same small pool of lamplight with the door open between them, and neither of them named it, and neither of them spent it any other way ever again. The cups came next. He never knew afterward whether it began by accident or design. The fourth night on the bench, there was a cup of tea left on the flat top of the garden wall when he arrived. Still steaming, bergamot, no note. He drank it. He left the empty cup where he'd found it. The next night there was another. He fell into drinking it while he cast, the warmth of it going into his cold hands as the enchantment went out of them. And it became the second small ritual layered over the first, and still neither of them spoke of it. Because to speak of it would be to acknowledge that Hermione Granger was making tea for Draco Malfoy and leaving it out in the frost for him to find. And there were no words either of them could survive using for that. But one night he looked up from the cup, and she was standing in the open doorway watching him drink it, arms folded against the cold. And she did not look away when he caught her, and he did not look away either, and the steam rose between them in the frost-sharp air, and something passed across the 12 feet of dark garden that had no shape and needed none. "You take it without sugar," she said. "I wondered if you would. You seem like a man who's decided he doesn't deserve sweetness in anything." He set the cup down on the wall. "And you leave it out where the cold will get it, so I can pretend no one made it for me. You seem like a woman who's decided that's kinder than making me say thank you." Her arms tightened across her chest. The frost caught the light on her lashes. "That's the most either of us has admitted to anything in 3 weeks." "Then let's not do it again," he said. And she laughed, a real laugh, short and surprised out of her, the first he had ever caused. And the sound of it in the cold, dark garden did something to him that he carried home and could not put down. The scar was the turning. It was late October, and Broadmoor had gone quiet in the way that is worse than noise. No new marks on the stones, no residue on the wards, nothing. A silence with weight to it, the pause of a patient man choosing his hour. It frayed them both. Hermione slept less. He could tell by the set of her face at the door. He slept not at all, and it showed. And one night, when she opened to him, she took one look and said, "You're grey, Malfoy. Sit down before you fall down. Bench. I'll bring the tea out. I'm not having you keel over onto my frost." She came out to him. That was new. She had never crossed her own threshold into the garden before. She had held the door and held her ground. And now she came out into the cold in her cardigan with 2 cups, not one, and set them on the wall and sat down at the far end of the stone bench, a careful arm's length from him, and drank her own tea beside him under the bare tree. And for a while neither of them said anything, and the not saying was easy. He had pushed his sleeves up to cast. He did that sometimes. The ward work ran hot in the forearms. He'd forgotten, and she saw, not the mark. she'd have looked away from the mark, he thought, out of a mercy he wouldn't have wanted. It was the other one she saw, the long silvered seam that ran from the inside of his wrist to the crook of his elbow, old and pale and badly healed. The kind of scar that tells a whole story in a single line to anyone trained to read them. And she had been trained. "That's a defensive wound," Hermione said quietly. "You put your arm up against something with an edge." Her eyes moved over it, professional and unguarded at once. "That's not from any training drill on any Tuesday." He went to pull the sleeve down. She stopped him, not by touching him, but by the simple weight of her attention, which held his hand still more surely than a grip could have. "Don't hide it on my account," she said. "I've a few myself. Aura work. Show me yours and I'll show you mine. Isn't that how it goes?" And she pushed up her own sleeve and turned her forearm to the frostlight, and there along the pale inner skin ran a scar of her own, thinner than his, whiter, but its twin in kind. The same story, arm raised against an edge, the body's oldest reflex. "Broadmoor's associate. The night we took him. He had a cursed blade, and I was a half-second slow." She looked at the mark on her own arm without flinching. "I've never shown anyone that. Ron used to ask about it, and I'd change the subject. It's strange, the things you'll say in a cold garden at midnight to a man you're supposed to hate." "Are you supposed to hate me?" He asked it, looking at her scar, not her face. "I was," Hermione said. "It was on the list. I had it filed." A long pause, the tea steaming, the tree above them creaking in a small wind. "I've lost the file, Malfoy. I don't know where I've put it. I've looked." And then, he never afterward knew which of them moved, or whether either did, or whether the cold and the fear and the 3 weeks of open doors simply drew them the last few inches. Her bare forearm was resting alongside his on the cold stone between them, scar to scar, the silvered seam of his wound lying parallel to the whiter thread of hers, not touching, a breath apart, close enough that he could feel the warmth coming off her skin in the frozen air. Neither of them looked down at it. They looked out at the dark garden, at the frost on the iron, at anything but the two bared arms lying side by side on the bench, and the static between the parallel lines of their scars built and built until it hummed in his back teeth like a struck ward. And still neither moved, because to move would be to choose, and to choose would be to change everything. And they were neither of them, yet brave enough for that. Then a fox barked in the alley beyond the wall, sudden and sharp, and the moment fractured, and Hermione drew her arm back and pulled her sleeve down and stood too quickly, and the cups rattled on the wall. "Finish the wards," she said, not looking at him, her voice not quite level. "It's late. It's cold. You should—" She stopped at her own door, her hand on the frame, and looked back at him over her shoulder, and the gold light was behind her, so he couldn't read her face, only the shape of her, the loose curl at her temple, the tension in the line of her shoulders. "Malfoy, the thing you're not asking me. On the bench. Every night." Her breath clouded. "I'm not asking it either. I want you to know that I know that we're both not asking it. On purpose." "I know," he said. "Good," she said, and did not sound as though it were good at all, and went inside, and the door did not shut all the way, but stood ajar the width of a hand, spilling its warm light out across the frost, to where he sat with his sleeves still pushed up and the ghost of her scar's warmth still on the skin of his forearm, casting protective enchantments over a house that held the only person who had looked at the worst of him, and, instead of turning away, had shown him her own. November came in hard, and with it the storm that broke the terms. It arrived without the earlier rain's patience, a black, wind-driven thing that came off the North Sea and fell on London like a settling of scores, ripping the last leaves from the plane tree, flinging them wet against the glass, driving the cold in under doors and through the gaps in old window frames. Draco apparated to her street, into a gale that nearly took him off his feet, and stood a moment against the wall with the wind clawing at his coat, and thought that no one, no man, patient or otherwise, would move against her on a night like this. The weather itself was a ward. He knocked anyway. The terms were the terms. She didn't answer. He knocked again, harder, the wind stealing the sound. Nothing. And the old wrongness woke in him at once, the sentinel's cold clarity. Because she always answered. She'd answered every night for a month, and the wards read clean, no breach, no residue, but the house behind the streaming glass was dark, every window black, and Hermione Granger did not sit in the dark. "Granger!" He put his hand flat on the door. "Granger! Answer me, or I'm coming in. Terms be damned." The door opened. She stood in the dark hall with no lamplit, and her wand unlit in her hand. And even in the near total black, he could see that something was wrong with her, some hollowness. And the wind flung rain past him into the hall, and still she didn't move to let him in or send him away. She only stood there. "Sorry," she said. Her voice was strange, thin, scraped. "I heard you. I couldn't. I was sitting in the dark. I do that sometimes, when it gets bad. I sit in the dark, and I don't light anything, because if I light something, I have to be a person, and I couldn't." She stopped, pressed the back of her wand hand briefly to her mouth. "You should ward and go. It's a filthy night. I'm not fit company." He did not ward and go. "Let me in," he said. It broke every term between them. He knew it the instant it left him. The dark of the house was hers. He did not cross uninvited. That was the whole of the covenant that had let the last month exist. And he stood on her step in the screaming storm and asked to cross it, not to protect her from Broadmoor, not to cast a single enchantment, but for no reason at all, except that she was hollow-voiced in an unlit hall, and he could not bear to turn his back on it and walk away into the wind. Hermione looked at him for a long moment. The rain lashed, the plane tree groaned. Then she stepped back and let him in, and shut the storm out behind him. The house was cold and dark, and smelled of cold ash and old tea. She did not light the lamps. She moved through the black hall by memory, and he followed the sound of her. And they came into the sitting room where the fire had gone out, and she folded herself into the corner of a sofa with her knees drawn up like a much younger woman. And after a moment, he lowered himself onto the far end of it, an arm's length that had become, over a month, their measured and unbearable distance. "You don't have to talk," he said, into the dark. "I know." A long silence, filled with a storm. Then, "It's the quiet that does it. Broadmoor going quiet. Everyone keeps saying it's good. No news is good. But I know what the quiet is. I know exactly what it is. It's a man deciding. I built the case against him, Malfoy. I sat across a courtroom from him, and I watched him mark me down in whatever ledger he keeps behind his eyes. And now he's out, and he's quiet. And every night I go to bed knowing that somewhere he's finished deciding. And one of these nights the wards will ring, and I'll have to be the woman who's ready. I'll have to be her, the aura, the one who doesn't flinch, and I'm so tired. Her voice cracked clean across. I'm so tired of being the one who doesn't flinch. Everyone needs me to be brave, and no one ever once asks if I'm frightened, because Hermione Granger isn't frightened. Hermione Granger has a plan. You're frightened, he said. It stopped her. Yes, she whispered in the dark. I'm frightened. I'm so frightened I sit in the dark so I don't have to see my own hands shake. He did not reach for her. Every nerve in him strained toward it, and he did not, because a month of not crossing had taught him the shape of restraint until it was the truest thing he owned. But he shifted on the sofa, closing half the arm's length between them, so that he was near enough that she could feel him there in the black if she wanted to, near enough to be reached, and no nearer, and he left the choosing where it belonged, with her. For a long time nothing happened but the storm. Then, in the dark, he felt the sofa cushion shift, and the warmth of her arrived along his side, her shoulder against his shoulder. Her weight leaned into him, careful and unhurried, a woman crossing a distance she had drawn herself. She did not put her arms around him. She only leaned, her temple coming to rest against the ball of his shoulder, and let him take some part of her weight, and breathed, and by the ragged unevenness of the breathing, he understood that she was, at last, in the safe dark where no one could see her, letting herself shake. He raised his hand, slowly, giving her every second to refuse it. And he laid it against the back of her head, her hair damp and cool under his palm, and held it there, not pulling her in, not stroking, just the still weight of a hand cupped over the curve of her skull, an old and wordless gesture. I have you. You can stop. No one is watching but me, and I don't count. And she made a small broken sound against his shoulder and turned her face further into him, and the last of the arm's length that had lived between them for a month closed and was gone. They stayed like that a long time. The fire stayed dead. The storm went on flinging itself against the house that his enchantments, cast from the step before he'd knocked, before any of this, still held safe around them both. And Draco Malfoy sat in the dark with the bravest woman he had ever known, shaking against his side, his hand cradling her head, and did not move, did not speak, did not do a single thing that might make it about him or make her regret the choosing, and thought that he could have died in that exact position and counted his whole ruined life a fair price for the arriving at it. When she finally spoke again, the worst of the shaking had gone out of her. You're very still, she said, muffled against his coat, which was still damp with rain. For someone I used to think was made entirely of nerves and cruelty. You've been sitting there like a stone so I wouldn't feel watched. You said the watching was the wound. His voice came out low and rough. I've been trying, ever since, to work out how to be near you without doing it. She was quiet. Her hand had come to rest at some point flat against his chest, not clinging, just laid there, over his heart, and he was intensely, unbearably aware of it, the small, warm pressure of her palm through wet wool, and he did not dare move for fear of dislodging it. "You've worked it out," she said. "For what it's worth. Somewhere in the last month. You stopped being a watcher and started being—" She hesitated. He felt her breath go out against his collarbone. "I don't have the word. There isn't a tidy one. Someone who's there, present, on my side of the glass instead of the other. I didn't notice it happening, and now it's happened, and I don't—" She lifted her head. In the dark, he could not see her face. Only the pale shape of it turned up toward his. Close now, closer than it had ever been. The warmth of her breath on his jaw, the smell of her, rain and bergamot, and the salt of the crying she'd let herself do, filling the small space between them. Her hand was still flat on his chest. His hand was still cupped at the back of her head. Neither of them had moved to end it, and neither of them ended it now. The static he'd felt on the bench with their scars side by side was nothing to this. This was the whole charged weight of the storm pulled down into the 6 inches between their two faces in the dark, a pressure that made his skin ache, that stopped the breath in his throat, that narrowed the entire howling night to the single unbearable question of whether she would close the distance or whether he would break a month of not crossing to close it himself. "Malfoy," she breathed. Not a warning, not quite. His name only, released into the dark between their mouths like the last thing before. The wards rang. They rang through the whole house at once, through the mortar and the ivy and the very bones of the place. A high struck glass shriek of alarm that brought them both off the sofa and onto their feet with their wands lit. In the same half-second, the tenderness ripped away and the fear flooding in cold and clarifying, because the enchantments he had laid over her house did exactly one thing when they made that sound, and that was to scream that someone had crossed the fence line with murder in his heart. And Draco Malfoy turned toward the black window with his wand blazing and his whole body between Hermione and the glass. And through the streaming dark of the storm-lashed garden, he saw a shape come walking, unhurried, patient, a man who had at last finished deciding, moving up the path toward the door. "Get away from the window," Hermione said. She said it the way she must have said 100 such things in the Aura's coat. Flat, fast, all the tremor of the sofa gone as though it had never been. The frightened woman in the dark replaced in a single breath by something honed. But he heard, underneath it, the effort the replacement cost her, and it was that, more than the shape walking up the path, that decided him. "No," Draco said. "Malfoy." He crossed my wards. His wand was up, its light steady, his whole body a wall between her and the black glass. "I laid them. I felt him take them. That makes him mine to answer. You built the case that put him in Azkaban. You don't get to be the one who stands between him and the door as well. You've carried this man for 6 years. Put him down for 5 minutes and let someone else hold him." The shape reached the foot of the garden and stopped, unhurried, and lifted its own wand. And the first curse came through the window in a shatter of glass and cold and hex light. And there was no more time for who would hold whom. Afterward, he could never reconstruct it cleanly. Duels never kept their order in the memory. They came back in fragments, out of sequence, lit like lightning. He remembered the glass going in, the sudden knives of the storm let into the room. He remembered throwing the shield, his own good wardcaster's shield, the one clean skill the ministry had grudgingly found in him, and the curse breaking against it in a spray of green sparks that seared the ceiling. He remembered Broadmoor stepping through the ruined window into the sitting room as though into a drawing room, rain streaming off him, an ordinary-looking man with an accountant's mild face and eyes that held nothing at all. And the mildness of him was the most frightening thing of that entire frightening night. "Malfoy," Broadmoor said, with something like interest. "They sent a Malfoy to guard her. How the mighty." His wand did not lower. "Step aside. My business is with the woman. You, I've no ledger for. You can walk out of this." "He can't," Hermione said from behind him, and Draco heard her move, heard her come up to his shoulder despite everything he'd said, because of course she would, because she was Hermione Granger, and she had never once in her life stood behind anyone while they bled for her. "Antonin, look at me. It's me you came for. Leave him out of it." "He put himself in it," Broadmoor said mildly, "the moment he stood in front of you," and struck. The next part came in the fractured lightning flashes. Two curses at once, split between them, meant to divide their shields. A good tactic, a patient man's tactic. Draco took his own on the shield and felt the second one, the one meant for her, and did the only thing there was time to do, which was not to shield her, but to move her. A hard shove of his free arm that sent her stumbling sideways out of the curse's line, so that it passed through the space where her chest had been and struck the far wall and blew a crater in the plaster. He heard her hit the floor. He heard her swear. He heard, distantly, that she was still swearing, which meant she was still breathing, and the relief of it was so total that it nearly cost him the duel, because Broadmoor was already casting again, and this time Draco's shield was a half-second late, the same half-second some cold detached part of him noted that had cost her the scar on her arm all those years ago. And the curse came under his guard and caught him across the ribs. It was like being struck with a bar of white iron. It folded him. The breath went out of him in a sound he didn't recognize as his own, and the room tilted, and he went down onto one knee on the broken glass with his wand hand, flung out to catch himself, and his side a single sheet of pain. And he thought with a clarity that surprised him, this is where it ends, and it ends between him and her. That's right. That's fitting. Only let her get up. Let her get up before he turns. Broadmoor turned toward Hermione, and Draco, on one knee on the glass, with his ribs broken and the black spots swarming his vision, and no shield left, and no breath to cast with, did the last thing he had, the thing that had nothing to do with dueling, and everything to do with the month of nights he had spent learning the mortar and the ivy and the bones of her house. He put his wand hand flat on the floorboards, and he did not throw a curse because he had none left. He reached down instead through his own wards, the ones still humming in the walls, the ones he had laid with his own hands 100 times until they knew him. And he pulled. He collapsed the whole lattice inward, every enchantment he had woven over that house across a month of frost and rain, and he brought it down, not as protection, but as a net a single crushing contraction of everything he'd built, and it fell on Antonin Broadmoor from every wall and every window and the very floor beneath his feet at once. A month of a wardcaster's patient devotion turned in one instant to a fist. Broadmoor's wand flew from his hand. The mild face lost its mildness. He was driven to the ground and pinned there, wrapped in the shrieking wreckage of the wards. And Draco held him there with the last of everything he had, his hand flat on the boards, his arm shaking, blood on his mouth, his broken ribs grinding with every breath, holding a killer to the floor of her house with the ruins of the thing he'd built to keep her safe. Until Hermione was up and across the room, and her wand at Broadmoor's throat, and her voice, the Aura's voice, hard and clear and absolutely certain, speaking the binding incantation that snapped silver cords around the man's wrists and ankles, and finally, after 6 years, put Antonin Broadmoor down for good. Then the ward's wreckage let go, and the pinning force released, and Draco Malfoy fell the rest of the way onto the broken glass and did not get up. He was not fully gone. He heard things. He heard her call his name. Not Malfoy, this time. The other one, the given one, the one she had never once used, torn out of her raw and frightened Draco. And he thought, muzzily, that it had been worth breaking a rib to hear. He heard the crack of her Patronus going out to summon the office, the enforcement squad, the healers. He heard the ordinary, competent litany of a woman handling an emergency, and under it, threading through it, breaking it, the unaurous sound of her voice cracking as she came down onto her knees in the glass beside him and got her hands on his ribs. "Don't you dare," she was saying. "Don't you dare, Malfoy. You stood in the rain for 9 nights and you don't get to... Hold still, hold still. Let me see. Oh, you brought the whole house down on him, you mad, you impossible." Her hands were on him, quick and sure and shaking all at once, the healer's diagnostic charms already glowing between her fingers and her face above his. In the wreckage was streaked and fierce and closer than it had been on the sofa before the wards rang. And this time, no wards were going to ring. This time there was nothing left to interrupt them but his own failing consciousness. "Stay with me. Do you hear me? You stay on my side of the glass. You worked so hard to get here. Don't you go back to the other side of it now." "Granger," he managed. It came out wet and wrong. "The wards. I brought them down. You're unprotected. I don't care about the wards." She half laughed, half sobbed it, her hands pressed to his side, holding him together by main force and will. "You are the single most maddening. You're bleeding to death on my floor, and you're apologizing for the ward work. I'll build my own wards. I've been able to build my own wards the entire time. You ridiculous man. Her voice broke fully, and she bent over him, her forehead coming down to rest against his, her tears falling onto his face, indistinguishable now from the rain still blowing through the shattered window. "I just wanted it to be you standing in the garden. That's the whole truth of it. That's the thing neither of us has been asking. I wanted it to be you." He looked up at her through the black spots swarming his vision, at Hermione Granger bent over him in the ruin of her sitting room, her hands keeping his heart beating, her tears on his face, her forehead against his, the given name still hanging in the air where she'd cried it out. And he understood, in the strange calm that comes at the edge of consciousness, that the thing he had wanted and never once let himself ask for was here, was real, was pressed against his skin, and that he had earned it not by watching from the dark, but by finally, at the last, standing between her and the thing that would have taken her in the light, where she could see him do it. He tried to lift his hand to her face. He got it as far as her jaw, his fingers leaving a smear of his own blood along her cheekbone, and she turned her face into his ruined palm and pressed her lips to the heel of his hand. And that was the last thing he knew before the healer's green light came flooding through the broken window and the dark came up and took him, her mouth against his blood-slicked palm and her voice saying his name, his real name, over and over into the storm. He woke in white. St. Mungo's had a particular quality of light, clean, even, sourceless, the light of a place designed to leave no shadow for anything to hide in. And he surfaced into it slowly, out of a heavy medicated dark, aware first of the strapped tightness around his ribs, and then of the ache beneath the strapping, and then, last, of the weight of a hand in his. He did not open his eyes at once. He was afraid to. If he opened his eyes and the hand was a healer's, or a nurse's, or no one's, if he had dreamed the whole of it, the storm and the sofa and her tears on his face, he did not think he could bear to have it taken away by daylight. So, he lay still and breathed the antiseptic air and felt the small warm pressure of fingers laced through his and let himself have one more moment of not knowing. "You're awake," Hermione said. "You've changed your breathing. You do that. I've watched you sleep enough to know." He opened his eyes. She was in the chair beside the bed, and she looked terrible. Grey-faced, hollow beneath the eyes, still in the clothes she'd worn through the storm, a cut on her cheekbone dressed with a strip of healing gauze, and she was the most extraordinary thing he had ever seen. Her hand was in his. She had not let go. There was a smear of something on her cheek that the nurses had missed, and he realized with a lurch that it was his blood, dried brown into the fine hairs at her jaw, and that she had sat beside him for however long it had been without washing it away. "You watched me sleep," he said. His voice came out a wreck. "Now, who's the night watcher?" She laughed, a cracked, exhausted, entirely undignified sound, and pressed the back of his hand hard against her mouth, and he felt her shoulders shake once before she got them still. 3 days, she said, when she could. "You've been under 3 days. Broken ribs, a punctured lung, magical exhaustion so severe the healers said they'd rarely seen it survived. You brought a month of ward work down in a single pull, Malfoy. Do you have any idea what that does to a body? You channeled the collapse of the entire lattice through your own." She stopped, steadied, started again, quieter. "They said you shouldn't have been able to. They said the pull that took Broadmoor down should have taken you with it. I told them they didn't know you. I said you were the most stubborn man I'd ever met, and you'd hold on out of sheer contrariness." Her thumb moved over his knuckles. "You did." "Broadmoor?" "Azkaban. The deep cells this time, the ones they should have used from the start. It's finished. 6 years, and it's finished. And it's finished because you—" Her voice thickened. She looked down at their joined hands. "Because you stood in front of me when I told you not to. when every rule between us said the danger was mine to hold, and you had no right to take it from me. She looked up. You were right to. I need you to know I know that. I've spent my whole life being the one who stands in front. It never once occurred to me that I might be allowed to be stood in front of, that there might be someone who'd... She stopped again, pressed his hand to her cheek this time, the uninjured one, held it there. You could have walked out. He offered you the door. You'd no ledger with him. He said so. You could have left me to it, and no one would have blamed you. It wasn't your fight. It was the only fight that's ever been mine, Draco said. She went still. Everything else they ever gave me to do, he said, the words coming slow and unguarded, the medication and the exhaustion, and 3 days of dark having worn away whatever machinery usually stopped him. I did, because I was told to, or because I was afraid not to, or because it was expected of the name. That's the whole of my life, Granger, up until a month ago, doing what the shape of being a Malfoy required. And then they handed me your address face down across a desk, because I was the man they cared least about losing, and I stood in your garden in the rain, and for the first time in my life, I did something because I chose it. Nobody ordered me to stay past the casting. Nobody ordered me to knock. Nobody ordered me to bring your house down on a killer's head with my own bones as the anchor. I chose all of it. You're the only choice I've ever made that was mine. His hand tightened in hers, weak but certain. So, don't tell me it wasn't my fight. It was the first thing in 30 years that was actually mine. The White Room was very quiet. A trolley rattled somewhere far down the ward. The sourceless light lay clean, and even over everything, over her ruined face and his strapped chest, and their 2 hands knotted together on the white counterpane. And there was nowhere for anything to hide in it. No shadow, no dark garden, no rain-blurred glass. Only the 2 of them, seen plainly at last, in the full, unforgiving light of a place that healed things. Hermione opened her mouth, closed it. He watched her reach for words and find that none of them were adequate and abandon them, and her free hand rose and hovered near his face, uncertain, and then settled, her palm against his cheek, her thumb tracing the line of his cheekbone, the touch he had wanted for a month and never once permitted himself to want out loud. "When you're well," she said, very low. "When they let you out of here, I'm having the sitting room window mended and the wards recast. My own wards this time. I've decided I'll build them myself." She held his eyes. "But I find that I don't want to sit behind them alone anymore. I've sat in the dark alone quite long enough. I think I've sat in the dark alone my whole life, actually, and told everyone it was strength." Her thumb moved on his cheek. "Come to the house, Malfoy, when you're well, not to guard it, not to ward it, not because anyone sent you, and not because there's a killer in the garden. Just come to the door and knock. And I'll open it, and it won't be so you can cast anything. It'll be because I want you on my side of the glass, in the warm, where I can see you." Her voice was barely there now. "Will you? Come." He looked at her for a long time. And here was the strange thing, the thing he could not have predicted about himself, that offered, at last, the exact and entire content of everything he had wanted through a month of frozen nights, invited freely in daylight by her own choosing into the warm on her side of the glass. Draco Malfoy found that he could not answer, not because he didn't want to. Because he wanted it so much and so nakedly that the wanting closed his throat entirely, and he was terrified, genuinely, childishly terrified, that if he opened his mouth to say yes, what would come out instead would be the whole flood of it. 30 years of never being chosen and never once choosing. And it would frighten her or shame him or somehow break the fragile, lovely thing she was holding out across the white counterpane. So he said nothing. He said nothing, and he watched her face begin to change, watched the offer begin to curdle in the silence, watched her start to withdraw it, watched the first flicker of "I've misjudged this" cross her features, and her hand begin to leave his cheek. And he caught her hand and pressed it back against his face, hard, and turned his mouth into her palm the way she had turned hers into his on the floor of the storm-wrecked house, and pressed his lips to the center of her hand once and held them there, his eyes shut, his broken chest heaving, saying with the whole of his body the yes he could not make his ruined voice release. And Hermione Granger, who had spent 3 days at his bedside with his blood dried on her cheek, who had cried his given name into a storm, who had finally, after a lifetime, decided to stop sitting in the dark alone, understood him perfectly, because she had learned, over a month of open doors and cups left on cold walls and scars laid parallel on a garden bench, to read the things he could not say. She curled her fingers against his mouth. She leaned in, close, her forehead coming down once more to rest against his in the clean white light, and she did not make him find the word. "All right," she whispered against his skin. "All right. You needn't say it. I heard you." Her breath shook. "I've got very good this last month at hearing the things you don't say." She stayed there a moment longer, forehead to forehead, hand pressed to his lips, and then she drew back just far enough to look at him. And there was something new in her face now, something that had put down at last the whole 6-year weight of Broadmoor and the whole lifelong weight of standing always in front, something loosened and frightened and luminous. "Get well, Draco. Get well and come to the door. I'll leave the lamp on. I'll leave it on every night until you do." And she stayed in the chair beside his bed, her hands still in his as the clean light held them both, and did not let go and did not leave, and was there, grey-faced and gauze-cheeked, and refusing every nurse who suggested she go home and rest. Every single time he surfaced, through all the long days of his mending, out of the dark and into the white, to find her there, watching him sleep. They let him out on a grey Thursday, 10 days before the winter solstice, with his ribs knit and his lung whole, and a healer's stern instruction to avoid ward casting of any magnitude for a month. She did not come to fetch him. He had asked her not to. It was a strange, prideful, necessary thing, that he wanted to walk out of St. Mungo's on his own 2 feet, under his own power, and go to her door as a man who arrived, rather than a man who was brought. She had understood that too, of course. She understood nearly everything now, which he found by turns miraculous and terrifying. "I'll leave the lamp on," she'd said, "every night until you do." And so he had 10 days of knowing that somewhere across London a lamp burned for him in a window, and he did not go, not the first night, nor the second, And it was not cowardice this time, or not only cowardice. It was that he wanted to be well when he came to her. Not mended enough, not discharged, not shuffling and grey and half a man. He wanted to stand on her step with his spine straight and his hands steady and offer her something whole, because she had spent a lifetime being handed the broken pieces of other people to hold together. And he was done, he had decided, being one more thing she had to keep from falling apart. So he waited. He ate the food the healers prescribed and did the breathing exercises that made his ribs scream, and slept in his own cold flat and let his body come back to itself. And every night he thought of the lamp, burning, patient, and did not go. And the not going was the last hard discipline in a year that had been nothing but hard disciplines. And it was almost unbearable, and he bore it. On the 10th night he was well. He knew it the way you know weather changing. He woke that morning, and his ribs did not catch when he breathed, and his hands did not shake when he shaved. And there was, for the first time he could not remember how long, no ache in him anywhere that a body could locate. He went through the grey day at the annex. They had, in the aftermath, stopped handing him things face down. A subtle thing, but he'd noticed it, the parchments coming to him face up now, his name allowed to be read. And when the day ended, he did not apparate home. He stood in the cold outside the ministry for a long moment, and then he turned up his collar against the December air, and he set out on foot across the frozen city toward the terrace where a lamp had been burning for 10 nights in a window. And he walked the whole way, every mile of it, because he wanted to feel himself arriving. The street was as he remembered it, and utterly changed. The plane tree was bare and black against a sky gone that deep winter violet that isn't quite dark. Frost furred the iron gate. The Muggle houses glowed here and there with the first Christmas lights, small and warm behind curtains. And the last house in the row, the narrow one with the untamed ivy, the one he had warded 100 times and stood outside of on 9 impossible nights, had a single lamp burning gold in an upstairs window, and the sitting room window below it was mended, the glass new and clean and whole where he had shattered it, bringing a killer down. And behind that new glass the room was dark and quiet, and he understood that she had gone up to bed. It was late. He had walked a long time. It was, he realized, very nearly the same hour it had been on the 9th night, when she'd come down through her dark house with her wand lit low and opened the door on the storm to find him. He opened the gate. He crossed the small frost-stiff garden, past the stone bench where they'd laid their scars side by side, past the wall where she'd left the tea steaming in the cold. And he came to her door, and he stood on the step where he had knocked every night for a month, and he raised his hand. And then he stopped, with his knuckles an inch from the wood, because he heard, from inside the house, a sound, movement, the soft creak of a stair, and then, faint through the door, her voice, not calling out, not challenging, just a low murmur to herself, the sort of thing a person says alone in a house at night, and he could not make out the words, only the warmth of them. And he stood on her step in the December cold, with his hand raised, and did not knock, arrested by the small ordinary miracle of the sound of her, living, safe, warm, on the other side of the wood, made safe in part by a thing he had done, and the enormity of it went through him and stopped his hand. The lock clicked. He had not knocked. He was certain he had not knocked. But the lock drew back from the inside, that same small sound like a bone breaking that he had heard on the 9th night, and the door swung inward, and there, in the dim gold spill of the hall, stood Hermione Granger in her nightclothes, a dark dressing gown thrown loose over pale cotton, her hair down, her feet bare on the cold boards, and she was not holding a wand. "I heard the gate," she said. Her voice was very soft. There was no readiness in her body now, none of the balanced weight of the woman who'd opened this door a month ago, braced for a fight. She stood loose and unguarded in the doorway, with the warm dark of her house behind her, and looked at him standing frozen on her step, with his hand still half raised toward a door that had already opened, and something moved across her face. Relief and disbelief, and a kind of luminous, unbearable gladness that she made no attempt at all to hide. "I heard the gate," she said again, "and I've thought it every night for 10 nights, every time a fox knocked something over, or the wind moved the branch against the glass. I've thought it's him. He's come. And it never was. And I told myself tonight it wouldn't be either. And then I heard the gate and the step, and then..." Her breath caught. "And then no knock. No knock, Draco. You always knock. That was the whole of it. That was our rule. You stand on my step and you knock, and I decide whether you cross. And you didn't knock. You just stood there. And I couldn't work out why until I opened the door, and now I..." She stopped. Her hand had risen to the edge of the door, gripping it. "Why didn't you knock?" "Because," he said, and his voice came out low and steady. The whole man arrived at last. "The knock was for when I needed you to choose whether to let me in. And I stood here, and I heard you, moving, alive, safe, in your own warm house, and I understood that I don't need you to choose to let me in anymore." He looked at her and did not look away, and let her see the whole of it plainly in the gold light where nothing could hide. "I came to choose you. That's a different thing. It doesn't need a knock. It needed me to walk across London on my own 2 feet and stand on your step whole for once, instead of bleeding or drowning or breaking, and say it to your face without a rule between us telling either of us what the next move is." He drew a breath of the cold, clean air. "There's no wards to cast. There's no killer in the garden. There's no order from the office. There's just me, on your step, in the dark, come to tell you that the only choice I've ever made that was mine, I'd make again. Every night, for the rest of my life. I choose you, Granger. That's why I didn't knock." For a moment, she did not move at all. And then she stepped back from the doorway. Not away, not a retreat, but the old gesture from a month of nights turned entirely new. The standing aside that had meant you may ward from the threshold, now meaning something else altogether. And she opened the door wide onto the warm gold dark of her house, and she held out her hand across the threshold into the cold, her bare feet on the boards, her hair down, her dark eyes full, and she said the thing that undid the last rule between them, the thing that closed the whole month of measured arm's lengths and opened but only so far doors in a single breath. "Then come in. Not to the kitchen, not as far as the kitchen and no further." Her voice shook and held. "All the way in, Draco. Cross the whole of the threshold. There's no line anymore. I took it away. I've been taking it away a piece at a time for a month, and now there's none of it left." Her fingers reached for his in the freezing air. "Come the whole way in, and don't stop at any door in this house, and don't sleep on your own side of any glass ever again." And Draco Malfoy took the hand she held out across the threshold and stepped over it. Over the line he had not crossed uninvited in a month. Over the whole cold length of every night he had stood outside in the rain, into the warm gold dark of her house, and the door swung shut behind him on the December cold. And for the first time in either of their lives, neither of them was standing on the wrong side of anything at all. The door shut, and the December cold with it, and they stood in the warm gold dark of her hall with their hands joined, and the whole month of not touching finally, entirely, behind them. And neither of them moved, because the not moving had become so deep a habit that even here, even now, with every rule dismantled, they hesitated on the edge of the thing they had wanted for so long that wanting it had become a kind of home. Then Hermione lifted her free hand and laid it flat against his chest, over his heart, the way she had on the sofa in the storm, but nothing held back in it now, no dark to hide the choosing. And she looked up at him in the low light, and he saw her decide, and he saw the fear in the deciding, and he loved her the more for feeling the fear and choosing through it. "You're shaking," she said softly. "So are you." "I know." A breath of laughter, unsteady. "We're a disgrace, two of the most capable people in the country, and we can't manage." She stopped, because he had raised his hand at last and laid it against the side of her face, his palm along her jaw, his thumb tracing the healing line where the storm glass had cut her cheek, and whatever she had been going to say went out of her entirely. He had touched her face once before, in the wreckage, with his own blood on his fingers, half conscious and certain it was the last thing he'd ever do. This was different. This was whole and deliberate and slow, the slowness of a man who has waited so long that he refuses now to rush a single second of the arriving. He turned her face gently up to his. Her breath came short, her hand fisted in the front of his shirt, the static that had lived between them for a month, on the bench, on the sofa, across a foot of pine, across every measured arm's length, pulled tight and taut and singing, until the last inch of air between their mouths was the only distance left in the world. "Draco," she whispered. His name, the given one, the one she had cried into a storm, offered up now into the warm dark between their lips like a key turning. He closed the last inch. He kissed her, and the whole architecture of restraint that they had built across a month of frozen nights came down at once, softly, completely, the way his wards had come down on Broadmoor, not shattered, but released, every held thing let go in a single breath. Her mouth was warm, and it opened under his, and she made a small sound against him that he felt more than heard, and her hand left his shirt and rose to the back of his neck and pulled him closer, and he gathered her in against him with an arm across the small of her back, and felt the whole warm length of her come against the whole length of him. And it was nothing like the arm's lengths, nothing like the parallel scars a breath apart, nothing like the careful, measured nearness they had rationed themselves for a month. It was the ending of all the distance at once, and he had not known, until it ended, how much of him had been cold for how long. She drew back only far enough to breathe, her forehead against his, both of them undone. "A month," she said against his mouth. "A month of you standing in my garden and me leaving tea on the wall and neither of us saying a single true thing." "I'm saying them now," he said, and kissed the corner of her mouth, her cheekbone over the healing cut, the line of her jaw, and felt her shiver and tighten her hand in his hair. "Every true thing. Ask me any of them. I've stopped keeping them in the dark. Then this one." She pulled back to look at him, and her eyes were wet and fierce and certain. "Stay. Not tonight. I mean, don't answer me tonight. I mean..." She pressed her palm flat to his chest again, over the strong, steady beat of his mended heart. "I've slept alone my whole life and called it independence. I've sat in the dark alone and called it strength. And I'm tired, Draco. I'm so tired of the cold side of the bed and the empty side of the glass, and I don't want..." Her voice broke and she let it break. No more Aura's steadiness. No more woman who doesn't flinch. "I don't want to sleep apart from you. Not tonight. Not..." "I think what I'm trying to say and making a catastrophe of is not ever. I don't want to sleep apart from you ever again. There. I've said it. It's the truest thing I have." He looked at her for a long moment in the warm gold dark. "You watched me sleep at St. Mungo's," he said. 3 days. You never left." "Someone had to be the night watcher," she whispered. "You'd retired from the post rather dramatically. Then let me tell you the true thing back." He took her face in both his hands. "I spent 9 nights standing in the cold outside this house because being near your sleep was the closest thing to peace I'd ever had, and I hated myself for it. And I told myself the wanting was a sickness. It wasn't. It was just the first honest thing I'd felt in 30 years, and I didn't have any practice at honest, so I mistook it for something shameful." His thumbs moved over her cheekbones. "I don't want to watch your sleep from a garden anymore, Granger. I don't want to keep it safe from outside a wall. I want to be inside the wall. I want to be the warmth on the other side of the glass. I want to fall asleep before you and wake after you and learn the sound of your breathing changing the way you learned mine." He bent and kissed her, slow and sure. "I don't want to sleep apart from you ever again either. So that's settled. We've both said our truest thing. There's nothing left in the dark." She laughed then, the real laugh, the one he'd first pulled out of her in a frozen garden over a cup of tea. Only now it was wet and whole and unguarded. And she rose up on her bare toes and kissed him with the whole of herself. And he lifted her clear off the cold boards, and she wound her arms around his neck. And the last of the cold went out of both of them, and the house held them warm, and there was no line anywhere in it that either of them could not cross. Later, much later, in the deep, still heart of the night, he woke. It was old habit. He had spent a month training his body to come awake in the small hours, to rise into the dark, and go to her garden and keep the watch, and the body does not forget such things quickly. He surfaced out of sleep in the dark, and for a disoriented moment did not know where he was, only that he was warm, warmer than he had been in longer than he could remember, and that there was a weight against his side and a slow, soft sound of breathing that was not his own. Then he knew. She was asleep against him, her head on his chest, her hair spilled dark across his skin, one hand curled loose over his heart, even in sleep. The bare window let in the violet dark of the winter night and the faint gold of a muggle Christmas light from across the street, and by it he could just see her face, slack with sleep, unguarded, none of the vigilance she wore all day, none of the 6-year wait, none of the woman who doesn't flinch. Just Hermione, sleeping, safe, warm, her breath going slow and even against his ribs. He had watched her sleep before, from a garden, in the rain, through a curtain, and he had felt each time like a thief, like a sickness, like a thing that had no right to the warmth it was stealing glimpses of from the cold. This was not that. He watched her sleep now from the inside of the wall he had once only guarded, from the warm side of the glass, from her own bed with her hand over his heart, and there was no theft in it, and no shame, and no dark thing crouched beneath it. He was not the night watcher in her garden anymore, keeping a lonely vigil over a warmth he could never enter. He was simply a man, awake in the small hours, looking at the sleeping face of the woman who had chosen him, freely, in daylight, with every rule between them taken away by her own hand, and finding it the most peaceful thing he had ever done. She stirred, her hand tightened over his heart, and without fully waking, in the low, blurred voice of someone speaking from the very edge of sleep, she murmured, "You're awake. Your breathing changed." "Old habit," he said softly into her hair. "I used to wake at this hour, to go and keep the watch." She burrowed closer, warm and heavy and certain against his side, and got her arm more firmly across him, as though to anchor him there, as though, even mostly asleep, she had understood the pull of that old habit and meant to hold him against it. "No more garden, no more cold. You're on the inside now." A long, slow breath, sinking back towards sleep. "Stay where I can feel you. That's the new watch. That's the only one." "I'll stay," he said, and he did. He lay in the warm, violet dark with the woman he loved, asleep against his heart, and her arm holding him to the inside of the wall, and he let the old habit go, felt it loosen and lift and leave him, the whole cold year of watching from outside, the whole lifetime of standing on the wrong side of every warm-lit window. And he settled deeper into the bed, and the warmth and the astonishing ordinary miracle of being let in. And he closed his eyes, and for the first time since they had handed him her name, face down across a desk, Draco Malfoy fell asleep, not keeping watch over her warmth from the cold dark of a garden, but held inside it, on her side of the glass, where the lamp was always on, and the door was never locked against him. And the two of them, from that night to the last of their nights, never once slept apart again.
Thank you for staying until the end. I want to talk to you for 1 minute. When I wrote this story, I thought about walls. We all build them. We think walls keep us safe. But sometimes a wall just keeps us cold and alone. Draco stood outside her house in the rain. He watched her window. He thought his longing was a sickness. He thought he had no right to be warm. There is a small moment in a law. He drinks tea in the cold garden, and Hermione says, "You take it without sugar. You seem like a man who decided he doesn't deserve sweetness in anything." That line is the whole story to me. So many people decide they don't deserve good things, so they stand outside in the dark. They watch the warm light from far away. But here is the truth I wanted to say. A wall is not always a prison. Sometimes a wall is a door, and the person on the other side is waiting for you to knock. The lesson is simple. You are allowed to come in from the cold. You are allowed to be chosen. You are allowed to sleep on the warm side of the glass. Do not watch your happiness from the garden. Open the door. Knock. Thank you for listening. I will see you in the next story.